It was a sweltering summer afternoon when the old Chevrolet Impala rumbled down the endless highway, its engine humming a steady, almost meditative tune. The road stretched out like a barren ribbon through the heartland, and the vast expanse of wheat fields and distant hills served as the silent witness to our unraveling. I sat in the passenger seat, the dusty wind tussling my hair as I tried to ignore the tension that had silently settled between us. Across from me, James, my boyfriend of 3 years, gripped the steering wheel so tightly that it seemed as if he intended to squeeze every ounce of life out of it. We had embarked on this spontaneous road trip in a desperate bid to resurrect a love that once burned fervently but had slowly dwindled into a flicker of bitter memories and unspoken regrets. At first, the journey had been filled with shared glances of optimism and laughter that echoed amid the rhythmic sway of the car. We talked about dreams we once had, plans that promised a future radiant with hope. Our shared secret hideaways from past heartaches had rekindled a sense of intimacy that had believed to be buried. But as the miles passed beneath our wheels, the weight of our accumulated grievances began to press heavily on our every conversation. It was as if every mile marker reminded us of lost time and promises broken over too many rainy nights. The reckless freedom of the open road gave way to a claustrophobic intensity that magnified every snide remark and every misinterpreted silence. I still remember the exact moment when the conversation veered off course. We were parked by a lonely rest stop off a deserted stretch of highway, a brief pause in our journey that was meant to be a shared respite. The midday sun blazed overhead, and the air shimmered with heat, its oppressive weight matching the atmosphere between us. James had been quiet for too long, and I couldn't help but notice the storm gathering in his eyes, an ominous dark cloud that threatened to burst forth with years of pent-up anger and sorrow. His tone was low, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Why do you always seem so distant?" he asked, his words laced with frustration. "You act like you're somehow above all of this, as if you don't really care anymore." I clenched my jaw and stared out at the horizon, my instinct to retreat warring with an overwhelming need to be heard. The memories of our happier times clashed with the cold reality of our present, and I could feel my heart beginning to race. "James, I do care," I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. "But sometimes I feel like I'm living a lie. Like I'm pretending to be something I'm not." The words slipped out like shards of broken glass, sharp and glistening in the scorching light. His eyes narrowed, disbelief mingling with fury. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone incredulous, as if he couldn't believe that the person he had trusted for so long might harbor such secrets. I took a deep breath, the silence stretching out between us as the world seemed to hold its breath for what was about to come. "James," I began, each syllable laden with a mix of remorse and defiance, "I faked my love for you." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and charged, as if it were a verdict pronounced in a court of broken dreams. For a long moment, we sat there, the only sound the distant rumble of the highway and the pounding of our hearts. Time seemed to warp, and I could feel every second dragging on like an eternity. "I did it to keep us together," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared of losing what we had, and I told myself that if I could trick both you and myself into believing in our love, then maybe, just maybe, we could survive the darkness." I searched his face for a sign of softness, a glimpse of understanding, but found only a maelstrom of anger and hurt. The silence shattered when James slammed his fist onto the plastic counter between us, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the confined space of the old station wagon. "You lied, no, you deceived me all this time," he roared, his voice cracking with a mix of betrayal and disbelief. "How could you? I trusted you with everything, my hopes, my dreams, my life. And you thought that was enough? That pretending would somehow fill the void?" His voice trailed off into an incoherent mix of sobs and rage. For a moment, I wanted nothing more than to reach out and explain, to tell him how deeply conflicted I had been and how every lie I told was meant to shield us from the inevitable collapse we both feared. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the truth was tangled with so many emotions that even speaking it out loud might worsen the damage. I stared straight ahead, not meeting his eyes, as the sunlight danced off the worn dashboard. I did it because I was scared, I finally murmured, my words barely audible over the clamor of our emotions. I was terrified that if I let you see the real me, the parts of me that are broken and hurting, you'd just leave. And so I built this facade, a delicate fiction where love was perfect, where nothing ever felt real enough to be painful. But now, it seems that my attempts at preserving us have only driven a wedge between us. My voice was steady now, even as my heart threatened to drown in a sea of regret. The car rocked as James fought for control of his trembling emotions. His eyes, normally so warm and inviting, now burned with an intensity that made me shudder. So that's it, he spat, his words curt and cutting. You admit it all. You were never in love with me. I was nothing more than a character in your little play. He turned his head sharply to look at me, his gaze scalding with an anger that pierced the silence. And you know what? I don't even know who you are anymore. His voice trembled, tears mingling with anger as the betrayal unfolded into a tidal wave of devastating realization. I could feel my own tears coming, warm and sorrowful, as I struggled with the enormity of what I had said. The revelation was like an avalanche, engulfing us both and leaving behind a wreckage of shattered illusions and endless questions. The memories of our laughter, the secrets shared in the quiet of night, and the dreams we once built together all crumbled at the force of that one declaration. The car's engine whined in a slow protest as we sat in the silence, the charged atmosphere thick enough to choke on. I could see the question in his eyes, the desperate need to understand how I had come to such a dark and desperate act. For what felt like hours we sat there, the world outside the car pausing its relentless spin, while our hearts reeled from the blow. Finally, James broke the silence, his voice softening ever so slightly in a heartbreaking attempt to reconcile the past with the present. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, he whispered, his tone laced with an irrevocable sorrow. How are we supposed to go on, knowing that every moment we spent together was built on a lie? His words were a mingling of anguish and resignation, a plea that carried the weight of everything that had been lost. I turned to him, my eyes red and puffy, a mirror of the hurt inside me. I don't expect you to forgive me, I admitted, my voice cracking under the pressure of too many unshed tears. I know I've hurt you, and I know that I've hurt us both. But I also know that the truth, as painful as it is the only way out of this cycle of deception. I was so desperate to keep our love alive that I betrayed it, and in doing so, I betrayed myself. I paused, letting the gravity of my confession sink in. I wish I could go back and undo everything, but I can't. All I have now is the raw truth, and I'm asking you to help me find a way through it, even if that way is one we never imagined. For several minutes, the only sound that filled the small space was the steady click of the car's cooling system and the far-off hum of the highway. James's face was a mask of conflicting emotions, anger, hurt, disbelief, and a profound sense of loss that no words could soothe. Finally, he spoke again, his tone resigned yet resolute. I need some time, he said, his voice barely audible as if speaking to himself as much as to me. Time to think about who we are now, and whether we can ever rebuild something from the ruins of what we had. There was an edge of finality in his tone that chilled me to the core. I nodded silently, knowing that this was a crossroad from which we might never return. The rest stop faded behind us as we resumed our journey, the silence between us now a tangible barrier built from broken promises and wounded souls. Every mile we traveled felt like a descent into the depths of regret, a pilgrimage to the altar of what might have been. The landscape outside, with its undulating fields and distant mountains, was the same as ever, yet it held no comfort. Instead, it mirrored the emptiness that had taken root within me. I remember watching the scenery pass by in a daze, each tree and horizon a painful reminder that while the world continued to spin, everything precious between us was now irrevocably altered. As the hours slipped by, my mind whirled with thoughts of the past, the joyous moments when love had seemed infinite and the quiet evenings that once promised a future filled with shared dreams. I recalled the way his laughter used to fill the car, warm and genuine, and how we would talk about building a life together, one day at a time. Now, every memory was tinged with bitterness, a haunting specter reminding me of the fragility of human connection. I knew, deep inside, that the confession had changed everything. There was no going back now, no undoing the hurt or erasing the truth that had been forcefully spoken into existence. Nightfall eventually cloaked the road in darkness, with only the headlights of our car and the scattering of streetlights offering any semblance of guidance. In that dim glow, the silence between us became almost unbearable, a constant, aching reminder that something vital had been lost. I tried to break the quiet with soft words and tentative questions about his well-being, but each time, he merely nodded as if acknowledging my presence while his mind traveled its own internal labyrinth of regret and despair. It was clear to me that the road ahead wasn't just a journey through physical landscapes, but a descent into the labyrinth of our fractured relationship, a path strewn with the ruins of our former selves. As we approached a small motel on the outskirts of a forgotten small town, exhaustion mingled with the raw emotions threatening to burst forth at any moment. I pulled the car into a faded parking spot, and we both sat in silence, the accumulated tension almost too heavy to bear. The motel's neon sign flickered in the cool night breeze as if impatiently urging us to confront the demons that had followed us across every mile. "I'm not sure what to do now," I confessed after what felt like an eternity. "I thought that if I came clean, we might have a chance to rebuild, to fix what's been broken. But now it seems like we've destroyed something irreplaceable." My voice was filled with a desperate vulnerability that I had rarely allowed to surface, and I longed for some sign that he might still believe in us. James looked at me then, his eyes glistening with unshed tears and the weight of his own sorrow. "You don't understand," he said, his tone more weary than angry now. "Every lie you told, every pretense of love, it wasn't just a false hope. It was a promise that meant something. And now that promise is shattered beyond repair." His words cut into me deeper than any accusation ever could, and I felt as if I were drowning in a sea of regret. "I thought that if we could just hold on long enough, that we'd find a way to fix it," I murmured, hooking my fingers together as if holding onto a lifeline. But maybe I was wrong. We spent that night in a thin, restless sleep, each of us haunted by dreams of what might have been and what now lay forever out of reach. Dawn crept in slowly, uninvited and unkind, bathing the motel room in a gray, unforgiving light. As I opened my eyes and took in the stark reality around me, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. We were adrift in a sea of consequences that our words had unleashed, the aftermath of a confession that had robbed us of our future. James gathered his few belongings in silence, every movement heavy with the resignation of a man who had lost more than just his lover. "I need to leave," he said softly, not as a question but as a statement of irrevocable intent. There were no dramatic protests or tearful pleas as he stepped out into the chill morning. The door barely closed behind him before I was left alone with the silence of my own guilt, a guilt that would gnaw at me with every passing day. I followed him to the dusty highway, calling out hesitantly as if afraid that even my voice might be too much of a betrayal. "James, wait," I pleaded, but the sound of his retreating footsteps was enough to make my heart sink in despair. The road stretched out before me, a long and lonely testament to every misstep and every broken promise. In the days that followed, the echo of that fateful road trip argument haunted me relentlessly. I tried to put on a brave face, to convince myself that the truth was a necessary path to redemption, but every turn of the highway reminded me of the moment when everything changed. I wandered through empty coffee shops and sat alone in dimly lit diners, replaying the argument in my head like a looping broken record. The confession, once spoken in a desperate bid to salvage a love teetering on the edge of collapse, had instead become a scar, one that would never fully heal. Months passed in a haze of regret and introspection. I attempted to reach out to James, to offer an apology that might bridge the chasm between us, but each message was met with silence or terse responses that spoke of an unspoken resolve to move on. At times, I wondered if he ever truly forgave me or if the betrayal would linger like a bitter aftertaste for the rest of his life. I visited familiar places that had once held happy memories for us, the little lakeside park, the overlook on the hill where we'd shared secret promises, and each time, the ghost of that confrontation was there, reminding me of the fragility of illusions and the harsh reality of our choices. One rainy afternoon, as I sat under the awning of a closed bookstore, I found myself questioning everything I had ever believed about love and sacrifice. The droplets of rain clattered rhythmically on the pavement, each one a painful reminder of the tears I had shed and the opportunities one had lost. In that moment of introspection, I realized that perhaps the greatest tragedy was not the lie itself, but the fact that I had been so afraid of being vulnerable that I had chosen deception over truth. I had built a wall around my heart, one that promised safety but ultimately left me isolated in a fortress of my own making. Time, however, has a way of softening even the deepest wounds. As the seasons turned, I started to see changes, a gradual acceptance that life, however shattered it might become, had a way of moving forward. I never stopped regretting the hurt I had caused, but I began to understand that forgiveness, if it were ever to be granted, had to come from within. I embarked on long walks along quiet country roads, seeking solace in nature and the gentle whisper of wind through the trees. With each step, I gathered strength, piecing together fragments of my true self that had been obscured by the lies I had told. Slowly, I started to rebuild not just my own identity but also the hope that love, even when scarred, could be transformed into something resilient and real. Late one autumn evening, when the air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, the handwriting unmistakably James's, a hand I remembered all too well from the tender moments of our shared past. My hands trembled as I opened it, every word inside echoing with bittersweet sincerity. In it, he wrote that he had been struggling to let go of the pain, that every day without me felt like an eternity, and that despite everything, he wanted to believe that we could somehow find a way to move forward. His words were raw and honest, a confession of his own vulnerabilities and the love that still lingered beneath the weight of betrayal. Yet, he made it clear that the path to forgiveness was long and uncertain, requiring time and perhaps distance for both of us to heal. I read his letter over and over, its contents imprinting themselves on my heart. I knew that if there was any hope left for us, it lay in confronting the truth, however painful it might be, and daring to trust again. I mustered the courage to write back, laying bare every regret, every moment of shame that had haunted me in the lonely hours of the night. In my letter, I admitted without reservation that my confession had been the worst moment of my life, yet it was a necessary reckoning if we were ever to find a semblance of honesty and healing. I promised him that I was committed to changing, that I was ready to embrace the vulnerability that came with true love, no matter how scary it might be. Over the ensuing weeks, our correspondence grew more frequent and fraught with the tentative hope of reconciliation. With every letter exchanged, we both began to see that the journey toward healing wasn't a linear path but a winding road filled with twists, turns, and unexpected detours. There were days when the pain of our past threatened to overwhelm us both, and nights when silence reigned, the distance between us measured not just in miles but in the raw scars of our memories. Yet, despite the setbacks, there emerged a quiet understanding, a fragile belief that perhaps, in time, the wounds might one day mend. The road to forgiveness is rarely smooth, and one crisp winter day we arranged to meet at the old bridge where we had once carved our initials into the wood. There, amidst the biting cold and the soft crunch of frost underfoot, we faced each other once more. James's eyes, though still marked by past sorrow, held the dim light of hope, and I saw in them the forgiveness I had been yearning for all along. We spoke for hours on that frozen bridge, sharing regrets, tentative dreams, and the promise to try again, even if that meant daring to love in spite of the fear of further pain. It was a conversation that neither of us intended to forget, a reckoning that quietly restored a fragment of what had once been lost. In the months that followed, our relationship slowly began to evolve into something different from what it was before. The specter of that fateful declaration remained, but it no longer defined us entirely. We learned to accept the imperfections and scars as part of our shared story, a testament to our ability to endure and move forward. Our road trips resumed, not as a desperate escape from the past, but as deliberate journeys toward rediscovery and healing. Each kilometer logged was a celebration of the resilience found in vulnerability and the possibility of new beginnings. Yet, even as we found tentative happiness in our renewed connection, I knew that the past would always hover at the edges, a persistent reminder of the moment when everything changed. The confession, as devastating as it had been, became the crucible through which we forged a deeper, more honest bond. While there were times when the memory of those heated words and shattered dreams threatened to unravel the fragile tapestry we were rebuilding, we continuously chose to confront the pain head-on rather than allow it to fester in silence. In those moments, we discovered that true love was not defined by grand declarations or perfect stories, but by the willingness to weather the storms together, even when the winds of betrayal and bitterness blew relentlessly. As spring arrived and the world around us burst into a riot of color and life, so too did our hearts begin to open softly once more. We found joy not in forgetting the past, but in acknowledging it as an integral part of our journey. Our conversations grew more open, our silences more compassionate, and our shared moments of laughter and tenderness became a quiet anthem to the resilience of the human spirit. I no longer saw the confession as the end of us, but as the painful yet necessary beginning of a process that taught us, above all, the value of truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Now, as I write these words on the anniversary of that fateful road trip, I look back with a bittersweet clarity. The journey we took was filled with heartbreak, anger, and innumerable missteps, yet it also bore the seeds of redemption, a hard-won understanding that love, when stripped of pretension, is raw, real, and sometimes excruciatingly painful. The road we once traveled together continues to remind me that every twist and turn, every pause in silence, and every heated argument has been a brick in the long, winding path toward healing. We are both irrevocably changed by that day, scarred, yes, but also wiser and more capable of embracing the authentic beauty of vulnerability. There are no neat endings in life's grand narrative, and our story is no exception. While James and I continue on our separate journeys, the lessons we learned on that fateful day remain a permanent part of who we are. I have come to understand that sometimes the truth is a heavy burden, but it is also the only path to genuine transformation. In admitting that I faked my love, I inadvertently stripped away the illusions that once protected us, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished reality that, although painful, carries the possibility of growth and true connection. In the quiet evenings when the wind whispers through the open window and I close my eyes to remember the quiet dialogues of forgiveness and regret, I know that the past is not something I can simply erase. It lingers, a ghost in every heartbeat, a lesson in every tear. And maybe that is the greatest truth of all, that in our darkest moments, when we dare to speak the unspoken and reveal our most guarded secrets, we open ourselves up to the possibility of change. I will forever carry the memory of that heated argument on the lonely highway, the moment when my desperate confession immediately fractured the delicate tapestry of our shared life. And though James's rage and the ensuing fallout may have seemingly ruined our lives for a time, that rupture also gave us the opportunity to rebuild from the ruins, to create a foundation rooted in authenticity and the enduring power of forgiveness. It is a bittersweet irony that, sometimes, through utter devastation, one finds the courage to truly love again. Now, as the evening sun dips below the horizon and paints the sky in shades of burnt orange and twilight purple, I reflect on that journey. I realize that life is less about the perfection of our deception and more about the painful, yet liberating, embrace of truth. And once, in the long-forgotten past, on a sweltering summer day on an endless highway, I told him those fateful words, "I faked my love for you." In that single, shattering moment, our lives were forever altered. We stepped onto divergent paths, each one lined with sorrow and hope, regret and the promise of healing. While our hearts may never fully forget the scars of that confession, perhaps, over time, we can learn to see them not as symbols of ruin, but as evidence of our journey toward finding something uneasily beautiful, a raw, honest love that emerged, not despite our failures, but because of them. In every stretch of the open road, in every quiet moment of remembrance, I honor the turbulent past that shaped me and the fragile hope that drives me forward. And even if our lives now lie apart, the lessons learned in that whirlwind moment continue to guide me, whispering that every end, however painful, carries within it the seed of a new beginning. Thus, the road trip argument remains an indelible chapter in my life, a moment when love, truth, and betrayal collided amidst the endless highway, altering our destinies in ways both tragic and redemptive. I face the future with a heart that is still tender, still flawed, yet resilient in its quiet determination to find beauty in every sunrise, and wisdom in every tear. And in that endless road of life, I carry the memory of us, of the mistakes, the confessions, and ultimately, the promise that even in the darkness, the light of truth can set us free. There are no perfect endings, only the ongoing journey of piecing together a broken heart into something that might one day love again, even if that love is tempered by irrevocable loss and the raw, unyielding power of truth. I told him everything on that road, and though it ruined our lives in so many ways, it also taught us what it meant to be truly alive, to be vulnerable, to be human, and to never hide behind the comforting lies that only serve to imprison us in our own despair. And so, as I continue forward along this winding road, I do so with both regret and hope intermingled in equal measure. I have learned that sometimes the hardest truths bring us to our knees, but they also allow us the chance to rise again, wiser and more profoundly aware of the fragile beauty of an honest heart. I will forever cherish the memories of our past, painful as they might be, for they remind me that I once dared to love in all its uncertain, wild, and heartbreaking glory. The story of that summer road trip, of that devastating argument, and of that fateful confession will remain with me as a deeply personal chronicle, a tale of shattered illusions and the slow, often painful process of finding redemption in the raw truth. Even though our lives took irreparable turns that day, the lessons of vulnerability and honesty continue to shape who I am and who I aspire to be. And so, on every lonely stretch of the road where the wind whispers the secrets of bygone days, I remember that love, in its truest form, demands that we expose our souls without pretense or deceit. It is a risk that may break us, but it is also the only path toward the healing that only truth can bring. Our lives, shattered by that one declaration, have become a testament to the transformative power of confession. A power that, even in its most destructive form, carries within it the potential to pave the way for a more genuine embrace of life's most essential truths. Though James and I now walk separate paths, our shared experience remains inextricably etched into the landscape of our memories, a painful yet necessary reminder that sometimes love must be unmasked in its most raw, uncompromising form, no matter how deeply it hurts. And so ends this chapter of our story, a saga of passion, betrayal, regret, and ultimately, hope. The road stretches on, and while the scars of that fateful day remain, they serve as a bridge to a future where the courage to be truthful might one day lead us back to the light. Even now, as the twilight deepens and the road ahead vanishes into the embrace of the night, I carry with me the lessons of our past, the echo of a love once faked, and the promise that even in the ruins of our lives, there remains a spark of truth that, if nurtured, can lead to new beginnings.